25 years ago, I fell in love with watercolor. And I think it's because I discovered the technique that I'm going to share with you today early on in my painting career. And it just made painting watercolors so much easier, almost magical. Because when I tried to blend and get soft edges with acrylics or oils, I really had to work at it, and I never got the soft, dreamy results that I wanted. But with watercolor, it was just so easy because of this technique that I'm going to share with you today. But before we get started, my name is Rachel Parker Varner, if you're new to my channel, and I like to teach not just the how of watercolor, but also the why, so you move along your painting journey a lot faster. And my promise to you is I pack all my videos chock full of so many watercolor tips that they can be overwhelming. But be sure to check out the list of bingeable content that has been very popular with my viewers. I'll put a link to several videos that I think you'll enjoy down in the comments and also in the description. So be on the lookout for that. I also have links to all my favorite supplies in the description and some free tutorials, lots of goodies in the description. So don't forget to check that out. And also, there's a couple of ways that you can follow me more closely. One is my free Facebook group where you can actually post your paintings and get feedback if you ask for it, or you can ask watercolor related questions or any art related content. And you can also join my Patreon for free, where you can keep in closer contact with all my watercolor shenanigans, which is pretty extensive. So I hope you'll join me there for free. And let's go ahead and look at some of the footage that comes from some of my newest tutorials. One being this horse, and another is this mouse painting. It was actually also done with these techniques. And so one thing I will say is these techniques can be applied to landscape painting, portraits, still life, pets, animals, flowers, anything. So although you will see me painting a horse and a flower with a mouse in it today, you can use these techniques in any painting subject with watercolor. All right, let's take a look. I also recently did a series of cardinal paintings, and one of them is a tutorial, but this one is one that I haven't made a tutorial yet, but I really like it because I used classic charging technique. So yes, the name of the technique I want to share with you today is called charging. So what is charging? In watercolor, anywhere that is wet, your paint will flow. If you want an area to stay clean and white, keep it dry. So for example, in this painting you see here of the cardinal, I will keep the whole background dry because I just want the water to flow within the cardinal and the paint to flow within the cardinal. So the first step of using the charging method is to wet the area where you want color to flow. You can wet your paper with watery tea consistency paint, or you can wet it with clean water like you see me doing here. I have a tiny bit of pigment in my water here, but I want to get most of the cardinal covered in color. I want some areas to be lighter and some to be darker and some to have slightly different colors than red. I don't want my cardinal to be an all flat medium red, which is a classic beginner mistake. When I see people trying to paint cardinals, they make them all a flat red because that is what their reference picture tells them to do. But to make your painting more artistic and aesthetically pleasing, you want to have a variety of colors and a variety of values within any one shape. So you can look at this cardinal as one big shape. And so with this charging technique, it makes it a lot easier to have beautiful gradations between both colors and values being lights and dark. All right, my first tip with this technique is to start with more watery paint. Now my paper is glistening. Is it puddling? No, it's quite wet, but it's not puddling. And then I drop in some tea consistency paint. So here's another tip, which is start with your tea consistencies. And then as the paper dries a little bit and has less water on the surface, the water starts to absorb into the painting. You're going to use thicker and thicker paint because if you don't, you'll get cauliflowers. All right, here's another tip. So when you're painting something like a red cardinal that is a flat medium red all over in your reference photo, one thing that you can make it look artistically more interesting is to use analogous colors next to each other. What are analogous colors? Analogous colors are colors next to each other on the color wheel. So you have red And then if you add a little yellow to red, what do you get? Orange. So here you see me dropping in some Daniel Smith transparent pyrrole orange. And the red I'm using is M-gram naphthol red. And so I'm dropping in these colors and they're blooming out because the paper is really wet and they will blend into each other. I don't have to do any work. And then the edge of the bird, notice I left really light, unlike my reference photo, because that gives an illusion of really pretty light. So here, what is the complementary color of red? Green. So here's a bonus tip, and that is to make your colors really sing, use a little bit of their complement in the painting. Now, you don't have to put green in your cardinal. I'm putting it where I'm going to put a lot of black. You can use green in the background, which I will do. And that green will make your red really sing. There's a really famous quote that says, without its complement, any color is dead. So keep that in mind. You want to incorporate, when you are painting a painting that has a really strong color in it, like red for this cardinal, you want to find opportunities to also include its complement, green, even if it's a gray green. All right, so now I'm getting the bottom half of the bird wet. I skipped over the branch because I want the branch to stay dry and have a white sliver for where the branch goes across the bird, because that's going to add an interesting dynamic of diagonal energy for our cardinal, who is more straight up and down vertical. So I need to cut that straight up and down energy. You can think of it in terms of cutting that energy with the diagonal motif of the branch. So there's another little bonus tip. But I'm dropping in the red. I'm charging in the red. This is M-gram naphthol red, the most beautiful red. And you can see where I left some of the feathers dry so I could have the structure I needed to paint around a few feather shapes to tell the story of feathers. So where I wanted there to be hard edges and shapes of feathers, I left that dry and I painted around those feathers. And now while my paint is still wet up here, I'm painting on the darker purple leaning feathers on the back and letting them melt into my still damp paper. So now this area of the cardinal is getting drier, but it's still damp. Now, if I went in with too drippy a paint, it would create something what us watercolorists call cauliflowers. I do have a whole video about cauliflowers, so I'll link it below. As you're using this charging technique, you need to use thicker and thicker paint to drop into your wet paper as it gets drier and drier, but it's not totally dry. It's getting more towards damp and less towards glistening. So that's an opportunity I'm using to drop in some fairly thick, pretty cream consistency purple. Am I using flat black? No, I'm using some thick purple because that is more aesthetically pleasing. And because it's still damp, that black blends beautifully into the red. And later, when this dries completely, I will probably paint more dark colors on his black markings to make them dark. So after all this dries, you can go back in and darken certain areas as needed, like that black marking around his beak. Later, after this dries, I'll go in and paint more black there. And then I'm just putting in my supportive greens and a little bit of purple in the background to make the reds vibrate. Then I dry it completely. So here's another tip. You can allow the area that you use this charging technique to completely dry and then look at your painting and decide what else does it need. Does it need some darker areas? Does it need some areas to be lifted out, which is one of my favorite techniques. After your paint dries, you can use scrubbing techniques to lift out highlights or certain areas to lighten them or soften them or blend edges that need to be softer. I do have a whole video about my scrubber that I love. I will put that in the binge list for you guys. So this is an easy way to paint lots of different subjects. And I'm going to show you a few more examples of where I use charging recently in some of my newest paintings. So let's take a look how else you can use the charging technique. There's so many different things you can do with this technique. For example, in the next painting, you're going to see me paint a flower, and I started not with clean, clear water, but with purple. And then I charged in more colors to make it a really interesting dynamic flower. Let's take a look. Remember, this is a full real-time start to finish Patreon tutorial that you can access on my paid offerings. And I'm going to speed up this footage times 4 so that it fits into this video format. But what you see me doing here is painting with very tea consistency paint first. And then what you're going to see me do as this develops is drop in more and more paint in a strategic way, but also a very fun, carefree way that is really quite easy and just gorgeous. The results are gorgeous. And real quick, while we watch me put this first layer of very watery tea consistency paint in, this, by the way, is a mix of cobalt blue and M-gram naphthol red. And now you see me adding more red to my mix. So this is the sexy part, is when you have a large shape like this, what you can do is not use one flat color, but use warm and cool versions of that color that you drop into this now wet paint to have really sparkling color. So instead of having flat purple, I have red purple, I have blue leaning purple. And now as my paint sets up and isn't so wet, I'm going to drop in more cream consistency, thicker paint on the bottom side of the flower clusters where there would be shadow. And this is what makes me fall in love with watercolor. Am I working really hard to blend all this? No, I'm just having fun dropping in color next to each other. Now, one thing you want to make sure is you don't have puddles. So what you see me doing here is soaking up some of the puddles with a wrung out thirsty brush. All right, now I'm getting some opera. And while this is wet, I'm dropping in some Holbein Opera to suggest the middles of the flowers. And then I'm getting some cream consistency paint, yellow. This is Holbein Aureolin, and I'm dropping that into the middle. And I'm letting the colors do the work for me. This is what made me fall in love with watercolor, is the watercolor will paint itself if you just get out of the way. You can drop in different colors and you can drop in different paint consistencies. Ooh, oh, this is my favorite part, by the way. This is where I dropped in some green. This is the very gorgeous Daniel Smith Permanent Green Light that I'm dropping in just a little bit. And when I did this, the color came alive and I was surprised because green isn't the perfect complement of purple, but it just turned this purple on. How sexy is that? And that's just so fun. And what other medium does this where it paints itself for you, where you get the paper wet and then just drop in color? And it's a little more complicated than that, but it's really quite easy. This is why I think I stuck with watercolor so early in my art painting career, because it makes watercolor easy. And it's so much easier to blend when you let the watercolors blend themselves instead of with acrylic, which I found impossible to get smooth, beautiful transitions and gradations and blends. I just found it so difficult, but look how these colors are dancing on this paper. By the way, this is Stonehenge Hot Press watercolor paper. I'm not trying to keep any secrets from you. And I promise when you watch my videos, you get extra bonus tips. So if you go back and watch some of my latest videos, you're going to get so many extra bonus tips, just like I just gave you. This paper is super key. One of the super key ingredients to make these colors really pop and glow and dance, and very fixable. Be sure to watch my latest video that was such a big hit with y'all called Stop, Don't Abandon Watercolor. Just do this instead. There's so many good tips in that video. I will put a list of videos in the comments that you just have to watch that will help you fall in love with watercolor as well and make it not so hard. Watercolor is very fixable and very fun and very carefree if you know how to approach it. So watch some of my videos to learn those tricks. And okay, now I want to show you a different version. Okay, so I love horses, y'all. And their muzzles are so soft and velvety. What is the perfect way to get a velvety looking muzzle on a horse? Get it wet first like I did, not puddling, and then drop the color in. So I know y'all like to know specific colors, so I'm using transparent Pyrrole Orange. That is a magic color, in my opinion, by Daniel Smith. And then to get these darker browns, I mix it with ultramarine blue. And to get a more black leaning color, I make it half Pyrrole Orange and half ultramarine. Look at, if you watch me paint, you really see me scrub on the colors with my damp brush. That gives me cream consistency, which I'm painting in right now for the nostrils. So as your watercolor sets up, when you do this charging technique, you get the paper wet first, not puddling, but wet, and you paint in your light colors and then your medium colors. And then as the paper dries out, you put thicker and thicker paint in for the darker parts of the area you're working in, like the nostrils here, because the less water you add to watercolor, the darker it gets and the more it stays in place instead of blooming out and playing with each other. That's what I'm doing here. Nostrils don't really bloom out softly. So as my paper is setting up, that's when I put the darker parts in with very thick cream consistency. And now I'm using my beloved Daniel Smith Lamp Black. I have a whole video about my love affair with Daniel Smith Lamp Black. It's such an amazing paint that does really special effects. I will link to my chick video in the comments as well, so you can learn. Oh my gosh, if you think you're in love with watercolor, wait till you see what this paint will do. All right, so that's another example of using the charging technique. All right, let's look at another. I'm going to give you two more examples of how you can use charging technique, but you can use charging technique as we've seen, and so you can use it in every single subject you paint, whether you're painting flowers like we first saw, horses, landscapes. You can make the most amazing skies using charging techniques. It's just so fun and so carefree if you just learn a few of the basic techniques. So I do encourage you to come learn with me. I'm always making new tutorials, but okay, let's take a look at how I use the charging technique to achieve both subtle gradations from different colors and also nice gradations from lights to darks and gradations from color to color, where the watercolor is doing the work, y'all. It's blending itself. It's so cool. Here we go. All right, the first thing you see me doing is putting down some tape. I want to paint a different kind of element, a hard-edged element, part of the barn. And I am going to get the inside of the barn wet, and I'm going to paint it in a more abstract way to just play a supportive role to the rest of the painting later in the painting process. And this is a perfect example of how I do my tutorials. I painted her halter hot pink, and it just didn't look right. So then I erased the hot pink and made it a dark blue like I'm about to paint here. And it pulled the whole painting together. The dark blue that I'm about to paint, that I'm going to show you, I'm using ultramarine blue and Pyrrole there with varying colors. So here I go in with some hot pink. Here I go in with some ultramarine blue. So once you get everything wet, you can then go back in and drop in color. And then I left this part of the inside of the barn dry so that I could get some interesting texture. So that's another way to really add some beauty to your paintings, is to have a variety of textures. One being splats. That's why a lot of artists like splats. It's just one more textural variety you can add to your painting. And another one is dry brush. And another one is, what I'm doing here is making it cauliflower by, when it goes into buckling stage, splatting in clean, clear water to add a variety of texture. So that's yet another way you can paint with this charging technique. There's been a lot of interesting things going on in my watercolor life that you may have missed out on. One, I got a 3rd place prize in a national competition. I'm pinching myself. And the juror was Mind of Watercolor, Steve Mitchell. How exciting is that? So it was the South Carolina Water Media online show. It's a national show. I do encourage you, if you are in the United States, to join South Carolina Water Media show, because they have 2 national shows every year that anyone in the United States can enter. And it's really fun. So I encourage you to do that. I got voted as People's Choice Award in the Women in Watercolor competition. And I'll put links to all that in the comments as well. And it's thanks to my viewers who went and voted for me. So thank you so much for making that possible. And 3, I have a painting that is up for bid, and the proceeds go towards the Columbia Museum of Art. So I donated a piece of work for their fundraiser gala that's going on in a couple weeks. And anyone in the world can bid on the paintings. So I will put a link to all the paintings that are up for auction, and go and bid if you see something you like, because they will figure out how to get it to you. But just know my canvas is pretty big, so it will probably be around $100 to $200 to ship it anywhere in the United States. So just know that before you bid, but I hope you will. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I hope you got a lot out of it. Be sure to leave me a like and subscribe and leave me a comment so it tells the algorithm how much you love me, so the algorithm will show me some love back and spread this video farther so that I can continue to bring you more and more free content, which I love to do. And like I said in the beginning, if you subscribe, you will not be disappointed, because I make it a point of pride to pack all my tutorials full of little watercolored nuggets of yummy goodness that will really help you up your game. And I sprinkle them throughout my videos. And even if the video is about one topic, I always end up sharing extra tips. So I try really hard to make it worth your time to spend your art time with me. And I appreciate it so much when you watch my videos. It means so much to me. For those of you who would like to learn from me more in depth, I will say, no matter what you want to paint, you will learn so many tips about how to paint watercolor when you watch my Patreon tutorials, which I have almost 200 tutorials now in my library, which you get instant access to when you join for as low as $9 a month. It's such a good deal because you get access to not just one tutorial, but almost 200 tutorials that are chock full of watercolor wisdom. And I really explain in depth in so many of my tutorials. You'll get so much out of it. In fact, I just had someone join, and they joined by mistake, and she said, I almost left and then I watched one of your tutorials, and even though I don't want to paint dreamy animals, which is my specialty, is impressionistic dreamy animals that are still realistic, she said, I decided to stay because I learned so much from you, even though I don't paint your subject. So that is how I design my tutorials. I design them to be full of the information you need to become a more independent painter. And that means working through the ugly stage, understanding that your painting is not always going to be pretty, that you have to keep working on it, how to fix things. I put a huge emphasis on how to fix watercolor, because so many watercolorists will tell you that watercolor is just a series of fixing mistakes. It be like that. So don't get frustrated and think you have no talent. I would hate for that to happen. And that's why I make a point of showing me floundering around sometimes, because I want you to know that that is normal. It does not mean you don't have talent. It just means you got to keep working your way through the problems. And so I try to give you the tools that you need to be able to do that, to empower you to be more successful with watercolor, because it is so fun. I love watercolor so much. And I want to impart that gift of the love of watercolor that I have onto you. So I hope you'll join my Patreon. And I would recommend that you join for a year, because then you get 2 months free. So you pay for 10 months and you get 2 months free, and you get access to my entire library. It's such a good deal because most of my tutorials are at the level of a course, which normally you would pay hundreds of dollars for. But for as little as $9 or $13 a month, you get access to as many tutorials as you can watch. I will say, if you join, be sure to reach out to me and say, this is my level, this is what I'm interested in painting, because a lot of my tutorials are quite advanced and they tend to frustrate beginners. I have lots of good content for beginners. You just have to know where to access them. And I've put a few things in place to make them easier to find. But if you reach out to me, I can help you. And it's not hard once you figure it all out. So anyway, I hope you will come join me and paint with me on this fun watercolor adventure I'm on. And anyway, I think that's it. That's all my news. And I can't wait to see you next week. So be sure to subscribe to learn not just the how, but the why of watercolor, so you move along your painting journey a lot faster. Bye, everybody.